Welcome to Careers in the Arts. My name is Jen Cumberworth and I handle the education and community engagement here at the Hult Center. In this session, we spoke with Francesco, the music director and conductor at the Eugene Symphony. We started off our conversation discussing what Francesco's daily work looks like and what goes into planning a symphony season. Sit back and enjoy and stick around for the end where Francesco answers questions live from our attendees.
Under normal circumstances, we would plan about 2 years ahead of time. So there's a lot, it takes a long time to develop our programming because we bring in, soloists from around the world to be a part of these programs. And we're dealing with, a kind of long-term vision of what kind of music do we want to play? How many musicians are required to play it? How do we want to design these programs? How are we going to market them? So kind of like my step is the first step, which is trying to develop the programs. And that can take, it takes months and it never stops. I'm always coming up with ideas of projects, collaborations, pieces we can put together. And then at a certain point, I'll be given a deadline, like you have to turn in your final version. And then that's when it kind of starts going out to everybody else. So, certain people need to decide what is the budget to do these programs. Then you're going to have people, how to market them, finding sponsors for these programs. So, there's a whole other set of things that go on, but I'm kind of the first step, which is, what direction artistically do we want to go in a certain year? Last year, for instance, was Beethoven's 250th anniversary. What do you want to do for that? Do we need to do anything for it? But those are the kind of issues I'll face. Kind of the best part of that is I also get to decide, what kind of living composers we want to work with. And I find that to be one of the most exciting parts of my job is finding great composers out there who maybe people are less familiar with, who I think are kind of leading the charge as far as what is going on today. And I get to be the ones to bring them to our audiences. And, but that's, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of listening. I'll set aside whole days where I'll just have a stack of music that I've never heard before. And I'll just start going through it and seeing if there's anything that kind of catches my eye that I think might be appropriate. So it's everything from just writing like 50 emails to sitting with a pile of scores and just going through them, a lot of thinking of just, creatively in that regard. So that's the administrative side. And then, you kind of, honestly, I would say that's more than half of my job, which people find kind of shocking because I am a trained musician. They don't teach you any of that administrative stuff in school. I was trained to, play piano. I was a composer and I did 2 years of conducting school where, it's really like you learn how to stand in front of an orchestra and how to conduct. They don't get into the nitty gritty of all the other stuff that you learn on the job. So the conducting side of it is more what people would expect. I have to learn the music. I have all my scores. I sit here at my piano with my scores and I'll start working through them and just learning them, how I want things to go. That whole process. And that can be whatever the piece is. If it's a Mahler symphony that's an hour long, that could be a year of work. If it's, a Beethoven symphony that I've conducted like 20 times already, I'm probably going to just, start looking at it like a couple weeks before, because I know I've got it in my hands still. So that can vary a lot, but that's more traditional for a musician, right? I don't have to practice an instrument. So it's more about kind of the mental process of working through it and deciding what should this piece sound like? What is it trying to say? How can I best communicate? And how can I communicate with my musicians in the clearest possible way about how I think this piece should be played? So some sense perhaps of what I'm doing on a daily basis, but like I said, some days it's only administrative work. Some days it's only, going on a walk in nature, thinking about a symphony that I'm studying. So it can be anything.
That's amazing. That's really interesting to hear the balance between the administrative work and then the artistic work. Is that typical that conductors do the administrative work too? Is that usually how it works in organizations?
It varies a lot. I find with a lot of my colleagues, we all have kind of various ideas about how it should work. And it's why a lot of people either don't go as far in the field as they might have, or why some just leave the field because it's not at all what they expected. In school, and I think what people look at when they see conductors is something very glamorous. You're on stage in front of the orchestra. You're the one presenting the music. You choose the music. That is such a powerful
So cool.
responsibility that you have, that thousands of people are only going to hear the music that you've programmed. And And it's, but that's kind of the dream version everyone has in their head. That's what they think of as being so exciting. And ultimately, if you get high enough in the profession, like if you're talking about the music directors of like the top maybe 30 orchestras in the world, like the most famous conductors, they are pretty much just doing the studying part, right? So they are involved in purely the creative process, and they have assistants and all the other people that help them with kind of the daily administrative parts of things. So you'll find if you get to a certain point, you can just not worry about it anymore. But if that's what you want, it's a minuscule percentage of people that are going to make it to that. So you're probably not going to be happy if that's what you're going for. And more so, especially in our world, and this is the right thing, in our world now, you cannot be isolated like that. It's not good. As a conductor, you need to be a leader in all respects. You need to have people skills. You need to be able to communicate. And yes, there are a few conductors out there still that can get away with not really caring about anything else in the world and just doing their work. And they are such geniuses that we're okay with that. But you're not going to see a Toscanini anymore, a conductor, from, the early 20th century who, could fire a musician on the spot and would scream and yell at everyone that didn't do exactly what he wanted. And you can't behave like that anymore. It doesn't matter how much of a genius you are. So the profession has shifted quite a bit. And for me, I'm perfectly fine with it. I wasn't sure, honestly. I was nervous when I first started because I knew I kind of knew how my position would end up growing, and that I would need to build a lot of skills on the communication side of things. But I've embraced it and I've loved it, and it's never been more important than this year.
Oh, I mean, I can't even imagine. That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it's maybe helpful to kind of have a broader understanding of everything that goes into it. So that's really interesting. So you mentioned that one of your favorite things was getting to work with well-known living musicians. What other parts of your job do you love? Like, what are the best parts of your job?
I think I'm really lucky. I think so much of my personality fits the different parts of this role, even the ones that I think people would find frustrating. Because as much as I am a musician and I love to just be in my little world with my music, and that's what I've been trained to do. That's what I love, is to just, spend a day with great music. I'd be very happy doing that. But I think also I'm a very social creature. I like to interact with people, and I think the best part about music for me is the impact it has on people's lives. I don't think I would be happy on a desert island just making music. And I think there are musicians that would be, but for me, I need that connection. I need to know that I am making people's day better, that I'm having some kind of impact on them with what I'm doing. I'm always in this mode of sharing. And I think being a music director in particular kind of maximizes that. So, if you're a great, if you're a great violin soloist, you're going to be in a different city every day, right? You're going to be a traveling musician. You're going to be, you're going to be doing great things. But ultimately you won't get the connection to a community, to a group of people. And if you're a musician in an orchestra, there are so many incredible perks about that, and how you get to interact with your colleagues and how that all works. But ultimately, one musician in an orchestra isn't going to be able to guide the entire organization, isn't going to be the face to the community of all of the music. And so I'm really fortunate to be in a place where I can use the things that I love about music. The fact that I want to connect with people is probably one of the, the best parts about what I do. It's one of my strengths, is that I want people to love what we do. And for instance, when I do a piece of new music, there's always been a lot of turmoil in our business because, yes, we are a little backwards. Our orchestras still play 80% of the time music written by composers who are no longer living, right? And that was never the case up until probably about 60 years ago. Up until then, you would play mostly living composers and mix it in, with some other ones. So, we live in an odd situation where people can get turned off if they don't know what they're about to hear. And I don't need to get into that now about why that's happened. I think honestly, it's kind of the fault. It's our fault for training our audiences to want to expect to like everything, to know everything, and that somehow they have to understand everything that we do on stage, instead of just trusting that how they hear a piece and how they feel about a piece is authentic, it's genuine. That is the truth. It's you, however you feel about the piece. And so what I've tried to do with new music, and is provide a connection to the actual composer. So instead of saying, here's a new piece of music and you just have to listen to it and hope that you understand something about it, I take it to the next level of not even me explaining it to the audience, but meet the composer, meet the creator, like sense their energy, their enthusiasm, and what they wanted to say in their piece of music, and make that personal connection, because it's much easier to experience something new if you've met the creator and feel that closeness. And so something like that, I mean, that is, yeah, I mean, that's probably the best part of my job. I think being
that's
able,
an amazing thing to be able to like curate that and start those conversations with the community.
Absolutely.
I know you're still saying something.
Oh, no. It's the collaborations. For me, by far the best part is the collaborations. And I think that's the future of what we do. We need to expand what we do. We did a project in Eugene called The Color of Sound, where we worked with a couple tech companies in town. And, I got to sit down with this incredible software engineer for a day, and he was like coding this orb of LED lights to go with what I was going to play on a keyboard. And it was just, that was one of the best days of my life, because I'm sitting here saying like, hey, if I play the keyboard like this and like do this kind of motion, can you make it like, can you make the orb react in this way? And he'd be like, sure. And he'd get on his computer and like code it in like 10 minutes. And suddenly I could do that. And to me, to want to work with people who have an expertise in an area I know nothing about, there's nothing more thrilling than that. So yeah, it's real. That is probably the best part of what I do.
Yeah, it's so awesome, because I mean, just to be able to incorporate all the different arts within the art that, your art with music, that's really quite a special thing to be able to do. And then to bring it to the communities, like, I'm sure that's super rewarding. So you talk about, you do, like you said, so many different things and essentially have two different jobs. And you've talked a lot about all the best things that you like about your job, but what would you say are the more challenging things, or things that maybe aren't the best parts?
Yeah, I would say the hardest part of this job, and I'm still not over it, and I'll probably never be over it, and I'm not sure if that's a bad thing or not, is you don't get to be a musician anymore, or at least not in the way that you think. It's technically I'm the boss now, and that's your position. I mean, you are responsible for every single musician in your orchestra, and you have to choose how you want to relate to them. And no one teaches you any of this at all. It's incredibly difficult to suddenly change how you work with musicians, because as a conductor, I did 7 years of assistantships, which is basically like an internship, a paid internship, right, where I assist the music director of another orchestra. And so I got to work with two giant orchestras, the Milwaukee Symphony and the Pittsburgh Symphony. And these are legendary orchestras. And I walked in there, as a 24-year-old, and you're nothing, and you should be nothing, but you are basically, you're the person that's just kind of in the background. No one wants to hear from you, no one wants to see you. You're just there in case someone needs you, in case the conductor gets sick, in case the conductor needs coffee, in case they need someone to listen to something, or go out and greet the audience, or you're whatever they need you to do. That's what you spend all your time doing. And so you actually start off where, like, if the music director's here, the boss, and then here are the musicians, you're like here, like you don't exist on this spectrum. And you go directly from being an assistant conductor to then being a music director. And so you basically go from being the person that hears everything, right? Because you're the fly on the wall as the assistant conductor. And all the mistakes that people make up higher than you, and you hear all the complaints and the problems that happen, and then suddenly you're the one at the top, and like there's no progression. You just suddenly go from all the musicians not really needing to pay attention to you to suddenly being at the top, where people are looking to you for leadership. And I think that's been by far the most challenging thing, because I still love making music. I just want to make music with my colleagues. And we do, and it's wonderful. But behind all the scenes, I always have to know that I'm responsible for the quality of what we're doing. And auditions can take days when you're trying to hire new musicians. It's a very long process, it's a very difficult process. And then if there's any issues within the orchestra, you come in again.
It's your responsibility.
Yeah. So, it blindsided me a little bit, and it's still difficult. But that's probably a good thing, because it means I care. I care about the people I work with. And, nothing's been harder than this year to see my colleagues not getting the work that they should be getting.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So you talked about how you had an assistantship, and then you basically go from assistantship to music director, which is a huge leap. And I can't imagine that's got to be a strange shift in your own mentality too, with status and everything. So I'm going to kind of jump ahead on my questions, but one of the questions I always like to ask is, how does one kind of get started in this career? Do you need to have a degree? Do you do things like assistantships? Is that part of the process if you were to want to become a music director?
Yeah, being the good news is, if you want to become a conductor, there are a million different paths. It's in the past, no one ever studied conducting in the past. What would happen is you were a musician in the orchestra, and you might, or actually, no, sorry, you weren't a musician in the orchestra, you were a pianist. And
Okay.
all conductors came through the opera house in Europe. And in the opera house, the pianists are the ones that have to play all the orchestra parts for the rehearsals for the singers. So the pianist would then learn the orchestra parts by playing them on the piano, plus working with the conductor. And so you would learn by imitation. So over time, what would happen is you would play for the conductor, then the conductor would rehearse the orchestra, and then they would do a run of, say, 30 performances of Tosca. And the last 5 performances of Tosca would go to the assistant conductor or the pianist. And so you wouldn't get rehearsals or anything. You would just copy what you had watched the director do. And so that was passed on generation to generation, is that the next group of people would work with those conductors, they would learn, then they would take their positions, and it was passed along in that way. And it could still happen that way. And often, especially like in Germany, where there's still so many opera houses, a lot of conductors come through that system still.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, in the US, though, we're a little more kind of set now in our ways. And very sadly, we kind of define everybody now, which is wrong. But, we have choral conducting, orchestra conducting, and then like opera. They should be the same thing. I conduct opera choruses and orchestras all the time. And I had to train myself how to do opera and choral, because I wasn't taught that, so there are some issues there, but it also is very fluid in that way. So for me, if you want to become a conductor, you have to be a great musician. That's just the bottom line. You have to be very proficient on an instrument. You have to know how to perform. You have to know what it takes to be a great performer, because that's the only way to be able to lead 80 of them is to understand the work that goes into that and how to make it happen. So for instance, I went to undergrad as a pianist and a composer. And then I switched to conducting, but I still kept my piano degree. They wouldn't let me just become a conductor. Generally speaking, you don't actually go into study conducting until graduate school. They want you to take a full 4 years to learn your instrument, and then they'll let you in grad school start conducting. So I did 4 years at the Mannes College of Music in New York. Then I did 2 years at the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. And that wasn't, they just gave me a diploma. It wasn't even a degree, so it's degrees in the music world don't matter as much as your own proficiency and the mentors and teachers you've had, the people that will stand up for you and be there for you. That's far, far more important. Who your teachers are matter much more than where you studied or how long you studied or any of that other stuff. So, and then, yeah, conducting wise, you will definitely need an assistantship of some sort, because it's the only way to learn this job. No school can teach you the administrative things you need to learn. So you want to, there's lots of, and those jobs you apply for like most normal jobs. An assistantship, they're posted online. You send in your resume, they'll invite you out, and you get to conduct the orchestra, usually for 10 minutes, and that's it. And they make their decision on, who they want to be their new assistant conductor. And
That's
usually
interesting. I was going to ask, is it so an assistantship, it's sort of like an audition in a way then, if you're...
Sorry, it's an audition. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a little of an interview to it, but it's an audition. Like it's basically who's the best conductor out of this group, right? And that's exactly what I had to do to get my assistantships in Milwaukee, and then in Pittsburgh. It's just a flat out, get in front of the orchestra and you conduct. And then they just vote and choose who they want to hire. So
stressful.
It is really, and it's incredibly competitive. I mean, it's insanely competitive. Let's just put it. I mean, this whole field is competitive just because an orchestra only needs one conductor. You need maybe 20 violinists at least, but you only need one conductor. And there's so many intangibles that go into that, right? Because an orchestra's not there. There's no such thing as an objectively good conductor, because what you do as a conductor, no one hears it. No one cares. No one cares. Like we think we care what a conductor looks like, but ultimately no one cares what a conductor looks like, because we're not making any sound. We're not producing the music. And so that's why conductors look so different, and they do so many different things, and they have so many different personalities, because the bottom line is, can you convey to your musicians how to play together? And if you can do that, no one cares how you do it. And so ultimately, that's what makes it so stressful. Is it's a test of your skill, but also the chemistry that you have with the musicians. And it doesn't matter how good you are. Sometimes it just doesn't work out.
No, that makes a lot of sense. There's that level of communication that you have to be able to be on the same page. So I'm curious. So like you talked a little bit about the process of having essentially an audition for the assistantship, and then you basically jump up to a music director. Is it the same kind of process? You apply and do almost like an audition again?
So it sort of depends on what level you're looking to move to your first music directorship. If you're, and this is the thing, and it's very important to understand, I think. I was recently watching the new Pixar movie, Soul. And
it's so good.
It was such a good movie, but I was partially offended because I felt like his work as a teacher was downplayed, right? The main character, he's a band teacher. And I couldn't figure out like why they had to pretend that somehow he wasn't a real musician or a good enough musician because he was teaching band, because that's a horrible stereotype that we have in the music community right now, that somehow if you conduct a youth orchestra, you're not as talented as someone who conducts a regional orchestra, who's not as talented as someone who conducts a major orchestra. It's just not true. I mean, some of the best conductors I know are the ones that are totally under the radar because they love their work and they want to stay with maybe their small orchestra because they like the life there. They like having their family there. And there's so many conductors that are with youth orchestras. I got to do 3 years with the Pittsburgh Youth Symphony when I was there as an assistant with the big orchestra. I got to be the head of the youth orchestra.
Amazing.
That's 3 years. I mean, honestly, of all the things I miss from my past, that's what I miss the most, was working with those students. It was so fulfilling, so exciting. And I put on some of the concerts that I'm most proud of. They might not have sounded as good as what I do now with a professional orchestra, but the energy and the enthusiasm was unlike anything, right? Because everyone's so riled up and so excited. You can do things that I could never do now with professionals. So,
so eager.
Yeah, exactly. And so I only want to say that because the paths are exceptionally different. And unfortunately, if you want to be like a conductor, like high level, it's about politics more than anything else. So I can't really help you there, right? Like when I was at the Milwaukee Symphony, which is a pretty big orchestra in the US, I applied for some music directorships and I never got a call back. Like not even interested, couldn't care less, right? The moment I got to the Pittsburgh Symphony, which is only a slightly bigger orchestra, but the moment I put that on my resume, bam, suddenly people were inviting me for auditions. So, and it had nothing to do with skill or what I was doing. Honestly, in Milwaukee, I had been doing a lot more work. I thought I had a better resume of what I was currently doing in Milwaukee than Pittsburgh. But the politics of the situation were that Pittsburgh looked like a bigger orchestra on paper. And so I got through the door.
That's so
And that's the
fascinating.
unfortunate reality there. The good news is the world needs great conductors, people who are passionate about what they do. And if you want to apply for an assistant conductorship or a smaller orchestra, those tend to be a little more, you can apply for them. They're more interested in your ideas. How are you going to take care of their organization? They don't care about how famous you are or how famous you're going to make their orchestra. They actually just want to know, do you care about our community? Do you care about our orchestra? And all of those things. So it's a little bit of a mix. Eugene kind of falls right in the middle because Eugene would be considered a smaller regional orchestra. But Eugene also has a reputation as having produced some of the great music directors like Marin Alsop, and a couple of my other predecessors have gone on to become very famous conductors. So Eugene has a very unique idea. And so when Eugene has a call for applications, instead of getting like 50 applicants, they get like 500. So
wow.
in many ways, applying to Eugene was more like applying for a bigger orchestra, where they probably were looking for people at least of my caliber on paper before even considering you.
That's so fascinating. So knowing that there is like such a wide variety of music director positions, can you give us an idea of what an average salary would be, or like a range? I mean, this is like, it's just a helpful thing for
Yeah.
students to know. And I know, I'm sure it probably varies greatly. And I'm assuming assistantships are paid, and they're like, so if you could give like an average for assistantships to music director.
So that's it's a tough one, and it's all over the map. I mean, honestly, and here's the problem is, again, it's so competitive that for an assistant, you have no bargaining power. I mean, it's like take it or leave it. And I had that happen because I got an offer and I was like, are you serious? And I took it because, like, what else am I going to do, right? And it helped me get where I am today. So, and they know that. They know they can offer you whatever.
Because there's like a million people, like you said, that are willing
Yeah.
to probably take it if you're not.
Yeah. And it goes into larger issues in our field, which I think are starting to come up, and they should be, about how people get compensated for what they do. I mean, you can go, is it right to have, I mean, and this is information that's, in the New York Times. I mean, people talk about it, right? Like, if you're the music director of the New York Phil, you make, $2 million a year, and you work 12 weeks a year. I mean, that's the truth. I mean, but at the same time, Beyonce goes on tour. How much does she make for 12 concerts? So, I mean, who are we to say it? Like, I mean, if you're that famous and you're bringing in all that money, great. I mean, I'm not going to say anything about it. Like, I'm too many far the rungs down. So, when you read that, it's very interesting, the problems you run into, especially in today's world where, inequality is such a problem, and orchestras are trying to do better about that. I have a feeling these conversations are going to come up again, and they probably should. With an assistantship, I mean, basically, don't go into this field unless you really love doing it. You're not going to be the one making $3 million. Like, none of us are, right? Like, none of us are. So, it's, are you going to be able to make a living wage? Like, if you're the music director of a youth orchestra, like are you going to make it work? Yes, probably. You're going to have a lot of responsibility, because the smaller the organization, the less support you have. So the more work that you have to do, but you also get paid more of kind of an administrator, so that you're actually making a normal salary, so that you're going to make a living. As an assistantship, it's going to hurt a lot. I think the average assistant makes about 1/3 of what a musician makes in that orchestra.
Oh, wow.
Which is livable, barely. But it was, I mean, I was coming out of college where I was making no money and playing for pizza. So still, for me, I was fine. Like, I lived very frugally, and I worked really hard. I mean, you are the first one in the door, you're the last one out the door. You are 24/7 at the beck and call of anybody who needs you. And you just work constantly, and you make sure everyone sees you work as hard as you can all the time. And that's I worked way harder as an assistant, more hours, I should say, not harder. I worked way more hours as an assistant than I ever would now. I mean, I can't even imagine the hours that I was putting in those days. And I would drive to 30 to 50 schools every year to give presentations. you know, I mean, it was way beyond just like even what my job description was. And you always, you know, that was the thing, is I was trying to show how important I was and how vital I was, so that when other orchestras call them to get a recommendation, they're like, yes, Francesco is the best. He gave everything, right? So, you know, that's kind of where everything falls. It's like,
Yeah,
you're gonna
that's
make a
really
living
helpful.
wage, and that's pretty much what most of us can hope for. And
Yeah.
I think as if you're going into music, you know, you have to be ready for whatever that world ends up being. I mean, for the musicians in our orchestra and the ones I work with down here with my other orchestra in Santa Rosa, you know, they're per service musicians, which means they get paid for the services that they do, rehearsals and concerts. They might even be prepaid, they might even be guaranteed, but they're still paid per service. Whereas
Okay.
the 35 full-time orchestras in the US, there's only 35 of them,
Wow.
they are on a salary basis. So, you know, you work a number of weeks and you get paid per week. But for these musicians in a per service orchestra, they are heroes in a way that that I'm truly humbled by, right? Because they will spend their day teaching, playing in other ensembles. They might play in like 3 or 4 different orchestras. In different weeks, they'll go to different orchestras, and they're driving, you know, 2-3 hours to get to the different orchestras that they're going to work with. It's crazy what they do, and I have to remember that, because, you know, our rehearsals are not during the day, because it allows them to do other work. So, you know, we have rehearsals starting at 7:30 at night, and I have to remember that I have, you know, almost 100 musicians that come into a room to rehearse with me for 2.5 hours every night for a week, after they've been doing things all day long. You know, so I might walk in there like fresh, ready to roll, like this is the biggest thing for me, right? Because that's
Mhm.
what I'm doing. This is my job. And I have to understand and work with the fact that, you know, I mean, and still the energy and the skill and everything they bring to our concerts. I mean, you only need to come to hear the Eugene Symphony and be like, wow. And then when I remind people what these musicians do to make this all happen, people are astounded. But I think when you go into music, you have to be happy doing that. And if you wouldn't be happy doing that, you're probably not in the right profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you said, it's more than just your job, it's your whole life essentially. And so I'm curious, I know you've talked a lot about your assistantships in Milwaukee and Pittsburgh and how you have your background in piano. Can you give us a little bit more information on your personal pathway to becoming a conductor, and kind of what interested you about it, and like what made you decide to go that pathway?
Yeah, you know, I think when I was growing up, there were no musicians in my family, and I think in some ways early on it actually gave me some interesting skills, in that I wanted to take more lessons. Like, you know, I'd started on piano as for fun. My parents thought it'd be cute to give me piano lessons when I was 7, and you know, it was like a fish in water, right? Like I just went nuts for it. And you know, then I wanted to play violin, and then I wanted to play an orchestra, and then I wanted to learn how to compose, and I think I picked up clarinet. And you know, I was just like, so, but the thing was, every time I wanted to do something new or something more, I would have to explain to my parents why it was important to me. And so I realized at a very early age, I was already talking about the things I talk about now. You know, why is music important in our lives? You know, why should we be excited about it? um, and it's sort of been like one continuous streak of trying to talk about why music is important. Just started off very young for me. When I was very lucky to get an early start conducting. You know, obviously a lot of people don't find out they'd even want to do it until they're in college. But I was playing a youth orchestra, and I think I was about 16 when the conductor of my youth orchestra noticed that I was so involved in everything, and how much I was loving it. And so she offered to give me conducting lessons. And that's kind of how I first got my start. I was, you know, still in high school. And so already at that age, I already knew this is the way I can have the most impact. This is how I can gather the most number of people together, and make people care about what I do. Right. I think there was something about it where I really wanted to bring people together. And that still is ultimately what I'm looking at, whether it's musicians or an audience. It's how do we come together and have these amazing musical experiences. And so you know, that I guess I was just very fortunate to have a lot of those experiences and obviously a wide background. As a conductor, you want to have a lot of different musical skills, so being a composer is really helpful to me now. Even though I don't compose anymore, I can relate to composers in that way. Having played a wind instrument like the clarinet gives me a sense of those instruments. You don't have to be able to play all the instruments in the orchestra. That's one of the big myths about conducting. You do not need to play all the instruments in the orchestra. You do not even need to know how, you don't even need to know everything about the instruments in the orchestra. In fact, one of the advice I give young conductors is there's nothing that musicians hate more than being told how to play their instruments. They want to be told how to make music, but they don't want to be told how to play their instruments. They know that better than you. And there's no sure way to get a bunch of musicians to hate you than to pretend that you know more than they do about their own instrument. So it's actually better, it's good to know kind of in the back of your head how everything works, but they'll be much happier if you let them be the expert and say, hey, I would like this sound. Can you give that to me? Right. And then they can figure it out. And that's a much better way to work. So there's some funny things in there. At any rate, so then that's when I knew I wanted to go to school for music and eventually for conducting, and I found a great piano teacher out in New York that I loved. And surrounding yourself with great music is really important. Going to New York was scary for me as a homeschooled only child, living in a very rural area. Going from that to like an apartment in New York City was horrific. but at the same time, I got to see so many incredible performances, and my world went from being like this big to like just the world finally. And so you learn a lot by osmosis as a musician, and so being around great musicians and great performances is really vital to your own growth and just getting that's just a basis for how you kind of grow up as a conductor. But I think that's been my personal journey is just working together with people, that sense of collaboration. Those are the things that have been really important to me that I think have served me well up until now, at least. Is that ability to continue to bring people together, to continue to innovate. It's vital. It's vital in our field to admit to the things that we're not doing well and the things that we need to do better. And I'm excited to be in a position where I get to do that, and so I embrace that part of my job now, which we've been talking about. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned you also do work in Santa Rosa. So is that common that conductors kind of work with multiple orchestras or symphonies?
Yeah, I mean, it goes a little bit back to like the salary thing, right? Like it's a little better if you can put two of them together. It's if you're working with like a giant orchestra, sure, you'll probably have one orchestra. A lot of conductors though, well, I shouldn't say a lot. I'm not really sure what the statistic is. A lot of my colleagues at least tend to have at least one position. I know colleagues that have three, and let me tell you,
Wow.
whenever I get asked to join a search, which I still do, which I think is really funny, because I'm like, you do know I have two orchestras right now, right? Like, if I said yes, you guys should be worried, right? Like, if I agreed to another job, you should be worried. So I think for me, two would be the absolute max, right? I mean, it's still a lot of work, and there are times when I almost regret it. I never do, because I feel so fortunate to work with two incredible groups like this. And the fact is, even in a time like this, they're driving distance apart. It's 8 hours. But
Yeah.
I'm far better off than colleagues of mine that have an orchestra here and one in Europe, or one here and one in Asia. I consider myself lucky to have mine close enough to each other that I can easily get back and forth. And as far as the conducting duties, that's actually not bad, right? Because a per service orchestra tends to be once a month. So as long as they don't conflict, I have a week in one place and a week in another place. And I have 2 weeks that I can split depending how I need to do things. So it's more the paperwork and the administrative work that can get overwhelming at times. But I consider myself very lucky to be with two great orchestras.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I know you talked about like some of the some orchestras. Like, I guess my question, sorry, I'm rambling here, is what is the time frame? Like you said, you're like maybe 1 week in one location, 1 week in another. Do you work mostly during the season, or do you have like any like extended periods of time off?
It kind of goes towards just how random the job is, right? Like you can make the most of it or you can make the least of it. And sadly there are people who make the least of it. I mean, it's, it, you, I mean, you can look around right now and see orchestras where their music directors are nowhere to be found, right? Because there's no performances. So you could just sit at home and maybe collect some sort of salary if your orchestra is doing okay, right?
Yeah.
But you don't technically have to do anything. I mean, you're not conducting, your whole season's been canceled. You know, and so I mean, there always are times that, if you don't have concerts, you could just say, well, this is going to be a vacation. And for me, I have to remind myself that sometimes, like, okay, you know what? These 3 days are actually going to be a weekend, otherwise I won't. I mean, I'll work straight through the weekends. Like the problem is, like, administratively, I need to be available 9 to 5, but creatively, I work best from about 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So, I run a really weird schedule where, like, after dinner and, I'll hang out with my wife and we'll, like, watch a movie, and then I'll want to work. Like, then I'll get my next burst when I'm like, oh, I really got to deal with this thing I need to do right now. So it's a very strange schedule. You can work as hard as you want, or as little as you want, and this year for me, I've worked harder this year than ever before because I wanted to be on the phone with doctors and physicians. Like, I wanted to know everything about COVID and how we could perform safely. And so, I mean, I remember there was a week where I thought I might have a lead with, like, a biotech company, and I was on the phone for hours, like, every day for like 2 weeks, seeing if we could, like, get some special, like, access to, some special kinds of testing to see if we could make it safer when we play together. I mean, it's the world's your oyster, and if you really want to make things happen, you can do it. And what I do now is, for the first time, I do a live stream every week, Thursday night. You can join me this week, Thursday night, 7 p.m. It's on my Facebook or my YouTube, and I'm on live. So I interact with the chat, and I'll usually talk about a piece of music that either I'm about to conduct or something that's really fascinating to me where I can link to a full performance, but I can talk about it and introduce it. I bring on guest composers, guest musicians, but it's really just a chance to hang out and stay connected in a time where we can't be in the concert hall together. And we've built up a really fun community of music lovers all across the US that just want to spend an evening hanging out and appreciating all the insides of music. And I can be a total goofball and be a nerd and break down great pieces of music in a way that is just kind of fun and approachable and not at all like, taking a class in college. So,
Yeah.
I think this year I'm honestly looking forward to getting back to more normal times, because it's going to be less work, because right now I feel like it's been important to go over the top and do more, because we all need this more than ever. And then at least when things get back to where we can be in the hall together, my focus can go back more towards, gatherings and how can we create great performances. But right now it's about, what can we do on a weekly basis to stay connected, to keep people together, for our own mental sanity, for my mental sanity, to have a creative outlet is so vital. So I'm not even sure where your question led this way, but
No,
you go
this
through
is
what
this
you know
is
schedule wise.
yeah, no, this is super helpful, and that's really cool. That's what a neat program to do. And I know it's been like a huge creative shift this year with everything. So that's really awesome that you've been able to kind of do new things and stay connected to the community in different ways. It's been so wonderful, like, hearing you talk about all this, because it's so clear how passionate you are about it, and really helpful to hear your pathway and then the steps and kind of understanding the position a little bit more. I'm going to jump down to some of the questions because I know we have a couple here. So also to the attendees, if you have any questions, dump them into the Q&A and I'll be sure to get them. So the first one we have is, I know in the beginning you talked about you will schedule and program like 2 years out. So do you ever run into any like fiascos where talent can no longer be there? Or, I mean, obviously
All the time.
All the time?
All the time. Oh man, I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than when you have a plan for 2 years ahead of time, right? And then like a month before, the artist has to cancel, right? Whatever guest artist you were going to bring in has to cancel, or something just happens that you can't play the piece that you originally wanted to play, or I don't know, things happen all the time. At a certain point, usually, you can replace a soloist, you can replace a musician at the last second if you have to. So, I mean, but this year obviously has been horrendous for that,
Yeah.
and, one of the things I'm working on now is to try to be fair, and that all the contracts that have had to be canceled with guest artists, I want them to be first in line when we start up again. And so, for me, I'm in this really weird position right now where I'm looking forward, but I'm also trying to bring things from the past that were canceled and make sure some of these projects still happen. So it's very odd because, I should be planning 2 years in advance. Right now, I'm planning months in advance, right? Like, I'm still trying to figure out what April is going to be like in Eugene.
Right.
Just last week, I figured out what February and March are going to be in Eugene. We're going to put together some small stuff with string orchestra that we can all do together. But we're talking months now. So for the orchestra world as a whole, it's been very disconcerting, but also great to see us adapting, because we should be able to adapt faster. And it's been a good trial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much change constantly. So do you have a network of music directors that you work with, or do you mostly do all this stuff solo?
Network wise, for some reason, there isn't a lot. I mean, I have colleagues and friends that I'm close with that I can run ideas past. I think the most important thing when you get into this position and you're still young is you have your mentors. And so I still have plenty of conductors that I look up to and administrators that I've worked with, all of whom I could ever call whenever I have an issue or something that I'm working on. So having a support group of people is really, really important, especially in a leadership position like this, when you can't go within your organization for advice. You have to have that network of people.
So do you often, or do conductors often have to move geographically for career advancement, since it's highly competitive and there are so few positions?
Yeah, and it goes towards, I think I would have answered the question differently in the past. I would have said you have to move. You have to be willing to move for whatever job you get. Whenever you get it, you have to move, because the only way to move up the rung is to keep on taking new jobs. I feel slightly different now, but then again, I think COVID has changed a lot of the way we think about it. I feel like in 1 year, my personal life has caught up with my professional life. Like I got married, I live in a house for the first time. Like all these things happened this year. I got a puppy this year, all these things, but all of these things I honestly didn't have time to care about for a decade after I left school. I was only focused on where the next job was, and so I did Milwaukee for 4 years, Pittsburgh for a couple of years. I was in Oregon for a while, but my fiance at the time was in Miami, so I was doing the 6-hour flight pretty regularly. So I was used to moving every couple of years. That was just kind of the way it was going to be. When you're an assistant conductor, you do have to, because the positions are not long-term, right? They're only 2 to 3 years. You wouldn't want it longer than that, because again, you're not very high up on the pile. So you probably, after 2 to 3 years, you're kind of done with that. You got to move on to the next thing. But I gotta say, I'm really happy with where I am right now. And I don't think I would have expected that several years ago, that at this point early on in my career, I could safely say, like, I don't know what the future is, but I do know I'm happy with the way I live right now. And if I don't get to, or don't have to travel constantly in the future for work, I'm okay with that.
That's awesome. What a cool to be, right? That you're content and like happy and fulfilled with the work that you're doing here. So one of the questions we have was, conductors have their own personalities, but are there universal hand movements that must be used in order to conduct?
It's a great question, and a great observation, right? That everybody looks really different when they conduct. There's a basic language that you have to learn. That's why you go to school, or that's why you learn to imitate. If you're going through the German system, because there is sort of an expectation of certain things, right? That for instance, if a musician sees that there are 4 beats in a measure. They want to see 1, they expect that to be a down motion, 2 is going to be over here, 3 is going to be over here, 4 is going to be up, right? And that's what you learn in school. You learn these patterns, right? And then you can watch a conductor and be like, I don't see any pattern there. But there is, subtly there is. We all start doing crazy things, and it also depends the orchestra you're with, right? If you're with a youth orchestra, you're trying to train these musicians to follow something that is clear. If you're conducting the New York Philharmonic, they're going to get bored out of their minds if you're just clear. Like, they don't even need you for that, right? So then you're trying to show a lot more how you want musicians to play. And that's where every conductor gets very different, because where a beat falls is the same for everybody, or should be the same. Where things get different is, how do you show that you want a soft attack to a note, right? That you don't want someone to like whack a note, right? So like one conductor might like, do like this kind of motion, or someone might do this kind of motion, or some might do this kind of motion. Like, we all will have different ways of showing the quality of sound that we want. And that happens naturally. So, I did not hate. I loved my first couple conducting teachers, but I was frustrated by them as a young conductor, because they would kind of put you in a box, right? They would say, you can do this, and if you want a crescendo, you do this. You want a diminuendo, you do. They would have very specific things that you would do with your hands to show what you wanted. And that was very important. I've watched conductors that didn't have that basis, and it's very hard to go back, right? So it was important that when I first started off, I was kind of put in a box, which annoyed me to no end, but it was very, very important, because now if I need those skills, say I'm conducting a piece that's very complex and I need to just be very clear and very simple, I can fall back on that. Like, I know how to just be very academic. And some conductors don't even know, like, they don't even know how to go back, right? So it's important to have both those skills. It's a great observation. And, there's a little bit of truth in all of it, that there are certain things that we have to do the same. And then, of course, everybody looks different because they expand on it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. So what is your favorite piece to conduct?
Oh man. So I mean, my favorite piece is it's whatever you're working on, right? Because you pour so much work into whatever you're studying. I just finished conducting Mozart's 39th Symphony last weekend down here in Santa Rosa. And, it's just such a brilliant symphony. I could, I'm probably on Thursday, I'm going to give like an hour-long talk about it because I'm so excited about it, right? So that's like my favorite piece in the world right now. But I will say, interestingly enough, if I do have a favorite composer to conduct, which is Brahms. I love conducting Brahms, and the reason is it feels good to conduct. That's the key thing. So obviously, there's so much great music out there. You can never pick a favorite or even a favorite composer, but a favorite composer to conduct, it's Brahms, because when you're conducting Brahms correctly, it feels good. It flows. It feels natural. For instance, you conduct Beethoven. If you feel good when you're conducting Beethoven, you're doing it wrong, because Beethoven always wants an edge. Beethoven always wants you like right here, and he's always going to keep on playing with you. And if you ever just let it rest, it's just going to fall flat, right? So I love Brahms for that reason, because it sounds so good from the podium when you're conducting it, and you just get to kind of like be in the sound. And if you're doing it right, everything should just flow beautifully. So kind of a half answer, but that's
No, that's really interesting. And that's very fascinating. So as a music director, what do you look for in a musician wanting to join the symphony?
Oh boy. Yeah, I mean, that's a whole, I think I actually gave there was some talk I gave earlier this year. I think it was the University of Oregon did I think it's still public actually on YouTube somewhere. I did a whole talk about the audition process for their music students, because ultimately it's not a unilateral decision. I don't get to, so it's by committee when we hire new musicians.
Okay.
For the orchestra. I have veto power, so I am important, but I can't unilaterally be like, I'm just going to pick this player. And in fact, with most orchestras, what happens is the conductor is not allowed in the room for the early rounds. So you let the musicians choose, basically let the musicians choose first. And when you get down to the final group of players, then you bring the music director in. And it's just because we have a little bit too much weight in the room, generally speaking. So by removing us, you make it a little more fair early on in the process. and then bring us in when you're down to like that final group of really great players. The key thing to know about auditions is they're blind. They're blind. So I have to say, looking at how people conduct interviews and hire people, we have a very fair system. It might be a little bit extreme, honestly. It's to the point, where you put down carpet, and women are not allowed to wear heels. If you have a question, there's a person that you can whisper to who will then bring the question back to the panel. There's all these sorts of things that are incredibly important. You cannot know the identity or anything about the person who is playing other than what they sound like. And we go through great lengths. You have representatives from the management and the musician side, the union side, to make sure the process is being run fairly. So it's very intense. It's actually very cool to see how it all happens to make it fair. So what are we listening for? Round one, the reason why 90% of people don't make it past round one is they don't have a steady tempo. I can tell you this right now. It's a real easy one. And it's hard. When you get nervous, when you get anxious, or you're excited, you have a warped sense of tempo. It's not because you rush or you're trying to rush. It's that what you think is steady is not actually steady. And that just takes a lot of practice and a lot of playing for other people. The best thing you can do, and this is the best advice I can give anybody, if you are about to take an audition, play for anyone who will listen to you. Your colleagues, your teachers, your parents, your friends, and you want to do mock auditions with them. So give them your book of music and tell them to pick random things, right? And make them just call out things, and you just have to play it. And what you do is you record yourself, because when you listen to yourself later, you're going to be like, oh, damn, I totally rushed there. I totally had a different perception of what I was playing. So I would say the number one thing is we're listening for someone who has that control over tempo. After that, all the other things become important, right? Like intonation, how clear are the notes you're playing, your overall technique. If all of that is looking pretty good on a very basic side, then we start looking at your musicality, right? And so you have to get past all that. You have to be exceptionally good at your instrument, and then we'll start considering whittling it down by looking at your musicality. And how do you play fortes? How do you play loud dynamics? How sensitive are you to changes in tempo? What if the composer did ask for a change in tempo? How good are you about making that happen? And then when it gets to the final rounds, and this is where it gets scary, comes down to personal preference, right? And then every player and every conductor has an idea of what we hear in our heads, the kind of player that we want. Do we want a really aggressive player? Do we want someone who's a little more kind of in a box, very steady, very square? It's a little mix of everything, and it usually depends on the position.
That's really helpful. Thank you for breaking that down. And you said that there was a talk through the U of O that you...
I feel like it. It might be on Facebook now that I think about it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question, and I know it's just about 5 o'clock. What are your thoughts on more contemporary composers? They listed some, but I'm afraid I will butcher names.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, John Cage, Alfred Schnittke, and Christoph Penderecki.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when I think of contemporary composers, I go much further past that, right? Like I'm going with like composers my age right now. Like when I talk about contemporary music, I love all those composers, but to me, it's an incredibly interesting era of music. But I think that more of like the 70s to the 90s, even though, I mean, they're still writing now, but like they shaped music during that period. Like they really set a new way of writing. And like John Cage with all of his like minimalism and his crazy ideas, and his around how we perceive sound. Basically taking music and saying, what if we just think of music as collections of sounds? Where do we go with that, right? And so that was a whole incredible era of composition, and he continues to kind of be the the bellwether for that. Alfred Schnittke, I love, very virtuosic Russian composer, and kind of this really did a wonderful job in a time when music was becoming much more serial. And there is a style of music I'm not into, which is composers that write music based purely on math. And there was a very long period of music that we went through where composers were so in their heads. And I understand why, and it is fascinating to study, but to listen to, I don't find it that exciting because it's not communicating anything other than its mathematical formulas. So contemporary composers for me, John Adams, Jennifer Higdon, are two incredible American composers working right now. But also here in Santa Rosa, I've announced a 5-concert partnership. I actually decided to bring on an artistic partner, and her name is Ellen Tafe-Zwillich. And Ellen and I are going to be hosting all of the concerts with the Santa Rosa Symphony for the next 5 months. They're going to be on YouTube and they're free. And the first one is on January 24th. All you have to do is go to the Santa Rosa Symphony website and you can see these full live performances with a chamber orchestra on stage. But we've been doing great stuff. And Ellen is now 80 years old, but she was the first woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for music. She's an absolute legend in the business. And one of the weird things about right now is people are not super busy in the music world. And so I was able to reach her directly and say, hey, if I perform a piece of yours on every single program that I do this year, will you partner with me and help create this amazing environment where our audience can get to know you as this kind of legendary composer? And so now we have this great collaboration going on. So I have to say, like right now, of course, I'm invested in her music 100% because I'm studying 5 works by her right now.
Amazing. What a cool project to be able to do because of the times that we're in right now.
Yeah.
Well, I want to be mindful of the time. Thank you so much for doing this. It was so interesting and informative to hear about the work that you do and your path, and to hear your passion for the work that you do. So I really appreciate it. This video will be on our YouTube page probably in a couple of days. We usually post it. But thank you. We appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And once again, please stay well out there, and looking forward to being back in the concert hall with all of you as soon as possible. So thanks everyone.
Okay, take care.